Great. Well, good evening to everyone. And thanks to the Rock Island Public Library for setting this up. So I'm going to be talking today about expungement and sealing of criminal records. My name is Kevin Hempy. I am an attorney with Prairie State Legal Services in Rock Island, Illinois. And so I have some slides, some PowerPoint slides that I'm going to be walking through today and sharing a little bit about criminal records relief generally, and then expungement and sealing as well. So I'm going to go ahead and jump over to the first slide here. So I just want to first acknowledge, so I work out of the Prairie State office, but my work for the next 2 years is funded through an organization called Equal Justice Works. And I have 3 community sponsors who are supporting my work, and those are Deere & Company, Lane and Waterman, and Riley Safer Holmes and Kinsella. So Deere & Company, local corporation to the Quad Cities, Lane and Waterman, a Quad Cities law firm, and then Riley Safer is a law firm out of Chicago. So I just want to start by acknowledging them and thanking them for their support of this work. Okay, so I'll tell you a little bit before we get too far into expungement and sealing of criminal records. I'll tell you just a little bit about Prairie State Legal Services, so you have a kind of a general background. The first thing to know is that we are a civil legal aid provider. So as you can see on the screen, we were created in October of 1977, and we currently have 12 offices that cover about 36 counties in the state of Illinois. In most of these counties, we are the only provider of civil legal aid to lower income members of the community. And so that's the work that we do. And a little bit more about our Rock Island office. So our Rock Island office, Prairie State, we have about 5 attorneys and a couple support staff that work in downtown Rock Island, where our office is. We cover 5 counties. So the 5 counties are Rock Island County, Whiteside County, Henry County, Lee, and Mercer County. So all told is about 300,000 residents. And in these counties, we're the primary or only civil legal aid provider. And about half of our population, our total is about 300,000 people. About half of that is in Rock Island County. And so that's a little bit about our service area. So now to give you some information about how our services work, all of our legal services that we provide at Prairie State Legal Services are provided free of charge. So we don't use sliding scale fees or anything like that, but we do have what's called a basic income eligibility guideline that we work with, and that's 200% of the federal poverty level. So for folks who are over income, we're certainly able to provide a referral, but we would not be able to represent those individuals in any legal proceedings due to our income eligibility guidelines. So you might be wondering, well, what is 200% of the federal poverty level? These are just basic numbers, just as kind of a guideline. It's a little bit more complicated than this, but we work with our clients just to go through some questions and see if they qualify. But for a single person, it's going to be about $25,000 a year. For a family of 2, it'll be about $34,000 a year. And for a family of 4, about $52,000 a year. And the bigger the household, the number will increase. So that's just a general understanding of kind of basic, the guidelines that we're working with in terms of our financial eligibility. I also want to share just a little bit at the beginning here about the kinds of cases that we handle at Prairie State Legal Services other than expungement and sealing cases, which we'll get into later in our conversation. On the screen, you'll see we handle quite a wide variety of different kinds of cases. There's 2 kind of buckets of cases that I want to highlight for you, and these are probably the areas that we work in most. And those are family law and housing law. So family law tends to be a lot of cases where we're assisting victims of domestic violence to get an order of protection. And then housing law tends to be a lot of eviction defense cases. And those are our 2 biggest categories, as you'll see on screen from our closed cases in 2020. And then another just kind of, you'll see on screen, a lot of other areas that we do work in, employment, health, consumer rights, income maintenance, all those kinds of things. So we end up helping folks out with quite a wide variety of issues. Okay, I'll jump to the next screen here. Since we don't have any participants joining live tonight, I won't give you the self-test, but I usually go through this question, and the question is, how many working age adults in Illinois, in the state of Illinois, have a criminal record? And when we say working age, we're considering adults 18 to 64. And when we say criminal record with this question, we're including convictions, we're including charges that were brought by a state's attorney, and then we're also including arrest records. So a lot of times the guesses that I get will be A or B. So you see on screen, 12%, 29%, those are the most common guesses. And the answer here is actually C. So 42% of working age adults, it's estimated, in Illinois have a criminal record, excuse me. And that is a statistic from the National Employment Law Project. And I just share that right off the beginning to show that, these criminal records are not a challenge that the few and the far between are facing. These are records that a lot of folks in Illinois are dealing with. And if you look at statistics, if you look at studies that have been done in neighboring states, in other states, surveys that have attempted to gather a kind of national figure for the entire United States, the numbers are very similar to this. You'll see estimates 1 out of every 3 adults usually, all the way up to 1 out of every 2 adults in some studies have a criminal record of some kind. Okay, so that just brings up kind of the natural question of what is life like for someone with a criminal record? And we see that these criminal records create barriers to access resources in the community in a few different ways. And probably the most common area where we see barriers coming up for individuals with old criminal records is employment. So studies have shown that 87%, almost 9 out of every 10 employers, conduct background checks on at least some of their employees. Another study found that 65% of employers won't hire someone with a criminal record. So really high statistics there in the area of employment. When we look at housing, one study found that 47% of landlords won't rent to individuals with a criminal conviction. And then the third area, maybe not quite as common, but it is an area that we see in our work, is higher education or continuing education. 3 out of every 5 universities uses background checks in their admissions process, according to one survey. So, for folks who have made a mistake at some point in their life and have suffered the consequences and are now trying to move forward and rebuild their life, they're often met with a lot of challenges in that process as a result of old criminal records. Okay, so now to talk a little bit more about kind of the nuts and bolts of expungement and sealing. So in the state of Illinois, there are 2 different remedies, 2 different ways through the civil law which you can clear your criminal record. The first is expungement, okay? And the second is sealing. And sometimes those terms are used interchangeably. Sometimes, people will use expungement to kind of refer to both categories, but they are different. And I think it's worth pausing here to kind of take a second and look at the differences. So expungement is erasing charges and arrests from a criminal record. So the way I remember expungement is more like erasing the criminal record. Expungement is erase. And then sealing, on the other hand, is removing a criminal conviction from public view. So it's a little bit more like hiding a criminal record. And it is a bit more complicated than that. But for most of the clients we work with, there's not going to be too huge of a difference between the effects of expungement or sealing. The big thing for them is going to be to clear their record however they can, and hope that that can help them moving forward in the areas of employment and housing and education, like we talked about a little bit earlier. Okay, so why are there two different terms? Why is it not all called expungement, or why is it not all called sealing? The reason is that different kinds of criminal records can be expunged versus the kinds of criminal records that can be sealed. And so expungement is for non-convictions. As you'll see on the screen here, there's a few different things that qualify as a non-conviction. The first is an acquittal. So an acquittal would be like you were charged with a crime, you went before a judge or a jury and you were found not guilty. You were acquitted. So that's a non-conviction. And so that's something that might be eligible or likely be eligible for expungement. The other kind of a non-conviction that we see a lot is a dismissal. So a dismissal is where you are initially charged with a crime, but then the state's attorney at some point in the process decides to dismiss the charges against you, and you're home free. So, and then the other two categories you see here on this bullet point on screen, some types of supervision is eligible for expungement if it's satisfactorily completed, and then some kinds of probation are also eligible for expungement. And that's a little bit tricky, and we work with clients to determine, whether they completed it satisfactorily and whether it's a type of probation that qualifies. But just something to be aware of, that occasionally supervision or probation might be eligible for expungement. Okay, so that's the first thing. Expungement is for non-convictions. Secondly, we have sealing, which, remember, is more like hiding a record, and that is going to be for misdemeanor and felony convictions. So sometimes we'll have folks who come to us and are under the impression that you can never remove a felony. In the state of Illinois, that is not the case. You still can seal most felony convictions. Okay, so let's jump to the next slide here. So again, if we had a live audience, this is where we would do another bit of an interactive part of the presentation. And I just like to ask, who can think of a criminal offense that might not be eligible for sealing? Because, as we'll see on the next slide here, there are 4 categories that the legislature in the state of Illinois has decided are never eligible to be sealed. So this is specific to sealing, so specific to convictions. But again, 4 categories here. You'll see on the screen, the first category is domestic violence. So this would include a violation of an order of protection. This would include a domestic battery and some other offenses as well. And that's a category that is never going to be able to be removed if it's a conviction. Doesn't matter if it's 20 years ago or 40 years ago or last week, just not able to. The second category that also falls under the exceptions to sealing, harm to animals. And so there are several offenses that would fit under that. And then the third category is sex crimes, except for prostitution. And then finally, another big category that we do see sometimes with clients is DUI and reckless driving. So those driving crimes that the state has said can never be sealed under the current law. Okay, so we'll jump over to this next slide. And this is a good time to kind of pause, because when I ask the question of, who can think of a crime that maybe is an exception, that maybe isn't eligible to be sealed, a lot of times we'll get the guess of murder or armed robbery or another very serious offense like that. And it's worth noting that those crimes are not specifically listed as exceptions to the kinds of crimes that can be sealed. So what that means is, technically by the statute, they can be sealed. But we also should acknowledge here that it's always going to be a judge's decision whether to seal a criminal record. Same with whether to expunge a criminal record. So, with murder, the likelihood maybe of a judge signing off on that is going to be lower. But it is technically possible the way the statute's written. And so again, just important to remember that the judge is always going to be the ultimate decision maker in the case. Okay. So here is another important part. And again, we're talking here just about convictions. So just about sealing criminal convictions. And that's what we call the waiting period. So what is a waiting period? Well, the rule is that there's a 3-year waiting period from the end of an individual's last sentence before they're able to seal any criminal convictions. So we'll talk through the process here, and hopefully that'll make it a little bit clearer. But typically the first thing that's going to happen in kind of the trajectory or the timeline of a crime, as you'll see on the screen here, is that you're arrested, okay? And that's the arrest date. And then there's going to be some time in the middle, kind of varies on how long, between the arrest date and when you're convicted of the crime and you're sentenced to whatever the judge or jury, says that your sentence is. Okay. So let's take a sentence of 2 years of probation. That's a common one, for example. So the day here, right in the middle, the day you're sentenced to 2 years of probation, that is not the date that we're worried about for the waiting period, okay? We're worried about right here, the end of the sentence. So what's the end of the sentence? For our example, that would be when you finish probation, okay? So the rule typically is going to be when your sentence ends. So like for this example, when you finish probation, you're going to have to wait 3 more years before you're able to seal any of your criminal convictions. And so the waiting period is not tied to your specific offense. It's tied to your last sentence. So for example, if you were convicted in 2005, let's say, of a retail theft, okay, and you spent a year on probation for that retail theft, and you were finished probation in 2006 for that retail theft. You might be thinking, well, it's 2021 now, so it's been way longer than 3 years, so I can go seal that conviction for retail theft. But that's not the way the law is written, okay? That's not the way the waiting period for sealing works. The waiting period is triggered by your most recent sentence. So if you were, convicted in 2005-06 of retail theft, like I mentioned, but you're currently on probation for a different crime, then you're gonna have to wait 3 years after the end of that sentence to go back and seal the retail theft or seal that other crime that you're serving the sentence for. So this can be a little bit confusing, and we work with our clients to determine the waiting period and kind of talk through the timeline. But it is something to be aware of when you're thinking about expungement and sealing of a criminal record. Okay, so there's one big exception to that rule that I just mentioned. So one big waiting period exception, as we call it. And the rule is this, or the exception is this: eligible offenses can be sealed upon the termination, so the end, of the petitioner's last sentence if the petitioner obtained a high school diploma, a GED, a vocational, certification or technical certification, or a career certification during the period of their last sentence. So what does that mean in plainer language? Okay. So again, we were talking about that 2-year probation example. It's a common sentence. So normally you're having to wait 3 years after the end of probation. But if during probation you got one of these things that I just listed, these educational or career certificates, then you may be eligible to seal your record immediately upon the termination of your last sentence. So immediately when that, for example, 2-year probation period ends. And so that makes a big difference. That could be the difference of 3 years. And so when clients come to us, if they're currently on probation, we want to talk to them and let them know about this exception and, First because these kind of career and educational programs and certificates can be a great thing for you moving forward. But secondly, because it has the potential to, again, it's up to a judge, but it does have the potential to really shorten the waiting period for folks when we talk about sealing their criminal record. So again, that's two things to be aware of: waiting period and then waiting period exception. Okay, we'll talk a little bit now about the process. And this is a process that's specific to Prairie State Legal Services and kind of our office. But the first thing that we have our clients do is we have them get a copy of their Illinois State Police Report, okay? And the Illinois State Police Report is a packet that you get in the mail, and kind of like a credit report or something. And if you flip through it, it has all of the arrest, charges, convictions that have been brought against you in the state of Illinois, okay? So your whole entire criminal record will be listed in this packet. And what this packet enables us at Prairie State to do is to determine your eligibility. So to look at the different offenses you have, to look at the timeline, and really analyze, whether you're eligible to expunge your record, whether you're eligible to seal your record, whether it's a little bit of both, or maybe you're in a waiting period and you're not quite there yet. So these fingerprinting, or these Illinois State Police reports are obtained through what's called an access and review fingerprinting process. And there's a couple different ways that you can get fingerprinted. There's live scan fingerprinting, which is where you get fingerprinted on a machine. And then there's ink fingerprinting, which is kind of the old school. You take a fingerprinting card and, actually press your prints on the paper. But either way, you send it into the Illinois State Police, and then you get your report back. So we work with our clients to help them and see what options they have in their area for fingerprinting and try to make that process as smooth as possible. But we do require our clients to get fingerprinted. The second thing, once our clients get the Illinois State Police report, is that we have them bring that to us. We'll analyze it, we'll work through it, and then we'll schedule an appointment to talk with the client and kind of let them know what their situation is and give them their advice. Okay, so the next thing to be aware of, and kind of I think it's important to kind of note at the start, is that this is not something, unfortunately, that can be done overnight. This is a legal procedure that takes some time. Really several months, kind of from start to finish, typically. The first part of the process you'll see on the screen here is the fingerprinting process. That can take 30 to 60 days. The second part of the process is the objection period. So the state's attorney in the county where the charges or conviction was originally secured, they're going to have 60 days to object and to say whether they feel that there's some reason that this shouldn't be removed from your record. And then depending on whether there's an objection and depending on the county that you're filing in, sometimes the judge will go ahead and sign the order without there being a hearing. And then sometimes there is a hearing where the client will need to appear in court. And so that process of signing the order or the hearing can be another kind of 30 to 60 days. And then the Illinois State Police is going to have 60 days to remove the record once the order is signed by the judge. So again, we're looking at, can be 6 months sometimes. And so, for most of the clients we work with, they find that it's worth the wait, that it does help them moving forward to have these records cleared for the rest of their life, but it is something that takes some time and takes some consideration. Okay. So I like to close kind of the conversations that I have about expungement and sealing of a criminal record with a few quotes from folks who have gone through this process. So these are not from my clients, but they're from individuals in other states who have gone through the process of expungement And I'll just read you the quotes real quick here. So the first one says, quote, "The chains just fell off my body when I picked it up." And they're talking about, the expungement order. "It erased the last 12 years of my life." End quote. Second quote, "I felt like something was kind of lifted off because now I kind of felt like a human." End quote. Third quote, "That one mistake can hang over your head for so long. I just want a second chance." End quote. So I just bring this up to show that, like we talked about earlier, expungement, sealing of your criminal record has the potential to make a big difference for your employment situation, for your housing situation, for your pursuit of education. And those are all super important, valuable things. But I think it's also worth acknowledging that there is a human aspect to this too, for folks who, many of whom the experience of their criminal record or conviction is the worst thing they've experienced in their life. And they are trying to move on. They're trying to chart a new course, and they keep feeling, like these quotes describe, the weight of their old criminal records. And so I think it's definitely important to acknowledge that that's another kind of benefit of expungement is that weight being lifted. So yeah, okay. I just want to briefly mention here, I'm not going to go too far into the specifics, but our work at Prairie State Legal Services in our Rock Island office, we do the majority of the work that I do with criminal records relief is expungement and sealing of criminal records. But we do work in a couple other areas. There's a healthcare waiver process for folks who are looking to work in unlicensed healthcare positions in the state of Illinois. And so, many employers are prevented from hiring individuals with certain kinds of criminal convictions. And so we can work with you if you're interested in, determining or interested in pursuing work in the healthcare industry in an unlicensed position. And then the other thing is driver's license reinstatement. We also work on those types of cases for folks who have lost their license and maybe that's affecting their ability to get employment. And so we can sometimes help out with that, or at least give some advice on those types of cases as well. Okay, so if you're interested in applying for our services, so again, we do have income eligibility guidelines, and then we do need to make sure that we don't have a conflict of interest in representing you. But if you're interested in starting that process, there's two ways that you can apply. The first is by calling 309-283-3744. And so you'll see this number here right on the screen, 309-283-3744. The second way to apply is to go to pslegal.org/apply. And there'll be a process that you can go through to apply for our services at Prairie State, Rock Island. So again, two ways to apply: call the number or pslegal.org. If you're an organization that is working with clients who might benefit from the service, feel free to call this number as well. And I have referral forms that I can provide to you, and would love to talk to any organizations about these kinds of issues as well. Okay, normally we would go to questions now, but since we're not live, I'm gonna end the presentation here. And thanks so much for watching.